This last section is the final little sort of area about the legacy of slavery and looks at racism. And as I said at the beginning, for those of you that weren't here, what this trail tries to do is not tell the history of slavery, but pick out things that we have in our collection that tell us something about slavery, its legacy, its impact on people in this area and also on British culture more broadly. And this is one of the areas where we're really trying to address that and look at the actual impact of racism. We're not suggesting that slavery created racism, because racism certainly existed before slavery, but what's certainly true is that without racism, slavery couldn't have existed and been as successful, in inverted commas, as it was, because it was racism that made it acceptable to people in this country that African people were being treated in the way that they were, much as we do in a kind of wartime situation. You know, you demonise your opposition and you make them subhuman, and that's what happened throughout the 18th century. The development of scientific racism, you know, fraudulent theories of the inferiority of African people enabled this to seem a legitimate and moral enterprise that was sort of in the natural order of things. But of course the problem is that the legacy of the sorts of images and ideas that were developed in those periods became absolutely ingrained in British culture and manifest themselves in all sorts of different ways. And these are just some examples which are all very familiar to all of us. And I'm just waiting for someone to say, oh, we've got one of those, because every group that's come round, is it the money box? Oh, the Robertsons ones. Oh, have you? Oh, right.
They're still on sale.
I saw some yesterday in the market, actually. I was really shocked, I have to say. I was really surprised. We had a really interesting chat on Wednesday when we went round, and there was a black woman in the group who said that how she'd worn the Robertsons Gollywogs, and how they, you know, she and all her brothers and sisters had worn the Robertsons Gollywog, and it wasn't till... Yeah, one of the Robertsons ones. Yeah. And how it wasn't until much later that she started to sort of piece together how that kind of fitted into a bigger picture. And so that's what these different objects are sort of representing. They're all from different periods as well. We think these Punch and Judy puppets are from the 1950s. Did anyone ever see a Gollywog figure in Punch and Judy? No. It's interesting, isn't it? We've got 3 of them, all from a Punch and Judy man in Oldham. And yet no group that I've taken around yet remembers ever seeing those characters in the actual Punch and Judy shows. So I don't know. We don't know enough about it. But
There's Morris dancing group from Bury or someone called the Coco and Baker, was it?
Yeah.
Who black up.
Yes.
Yeah, as well.
And that's quite complicated because it's linked in with Morris dancing, and well, possibly it's Moorish dancing, isn't it? But nobody really knows. So there's so many layers of connection there that are really difficult to unpick. But yes, once you start seeing them in the context of these sorts of objects, it's quite difficult to unpick the threads, really, isn't it? These go back, these money boxes, which is what a lot of people still have, go back quite a long way. They're kind of American images that come from the 19th century, and the lineage is really direct to slavery in the 19th century and the sort of images that come out in American culture during the period of slavery and afterwards. Sorry? I know, yeah, that's right. That's right, and ironically, there is quite a big market again in sort of historical interest in these figures. Yeah.
So the people that thought there would be, it's our powers that be, think those people were being victimised by the things that we did, and the people themselves don't think they were being victimised.
That's not my experience at all. My friends who are black find that very difficult. They really do, because it's a really big stereotype. It's just simplifying somebody down to some basic features, not even like cartoonish things, but it stood for something that was people kept down. The term Sambo, that again were used as abuse. I've been looking at some slave lists in the British Library, And it's amazing the mixture. You can see things evolving just through those lists from people that kept their African names, their names from the Ghana, from the coast in Ghana, that managed to keep hold of them. When at the time the slave owners were taking those away as well as language and everything else. And names imposed are actually a very sort of benign patience and charity, the sort of Puritan names that came from England, America, but also the name Sambo and things were coming in then. I'm not sure what they meant then, but they were certainly picked on later as a slave name, I think. And that's how really, I certainly know that my friends who are black, to a woman, fine though, I won't say some of the words that they find. I think it varies, like you say, some people, and that is in fact my benchmark of how far I've travelled with my racism, for collecting those as the little stamps first of all in the marmalade jar, to finding this was just something lovely to collect, innocent probably, to how I feel now, how I've been sort of not totally sensitised, because I think you're always working on your own racism, but how it's moved, have moved along because of first-hand experience and not some images meted out from advertising and up through conventional so-called cultural ways.
I think one of the
Perhaps that naive, I don't know. But that, people are people to me, don't matter what colour they are, don't matter what creed they are.
I think how people respond to them, as you were saying, does vary, and as you say, also varies over time and context as well, doesn't it? I think one of the things that is no accident about these sorts of objects is that they're often seen as very humorous, and they often come out of cartoons which are designed to make us laugh. And to some extent, that is a reflection of one of the many stereotypes which develop, which is particularly develop in America, which is of slaves and black people being kind of happy-go-lucky, and it all being a bit of a joke, which is one of the clear stereotypes that come out. But it also makes it very difficult to argue against, because people say, it's only a joke, lighten up, don't take it so seriously. And of course it is serious, it's, extremely serious. For the people who have suffered that kind of racism. So it's seeing these objects in their bigger context, isn't it, that's important. And when you look at it sort of historically and see where the images come from and how they've been used again and again and again over time, and by particular groups of people, not by everybody, but by particular groups of people, then you start, I think, to sort of slot them into this kind of bigger picture, which is this exactly the kind of debate that we were hoping to provoke by bringing them out, because some people would say we shouldn't even show them, and there are a lot of people, and we felt it was quite a hard decision in a way, because of course for some people coming round the corner and seeing these, thinking they're very ugly and very offensive, personally offensive, it's quite difficult for them to be put in that position. But we thought it was very important that they were shown, because they are a reflection of a historical truth, and it is a direct result of a legacy of slavery, which is what this trail is about. So we thought that was important. We also included on the top shelf, which they're quite delicate, so you might not see them back there. Do you want to come a bit closer and have a look? These are prints from a series called the Benin Bronzes, by a black British artist called Tony Phillips. They're two of a series of 10. Does anyone know what the Benin Bronzes were? Do you know about the Benin Bronzes? They are extremely beautiful and sophisticated objects that were made from the 16th, 17th century onwards in what is now modern Nigeria and the state of Benin, that part of Africa. And when they were discovered by Europeans in the 19th century, it was assumed that because they were so beautiful and technically sophisticated that they couldn't possibly have been made by Africans. And if they had been made by Africans, of course it must have been Europeans that taught them how to do it. Whereas in fact the techniques that they were using were actually rather more sophisticated than a lot of what was going on in Europe at the time. And this is a really important message for us in museums about how we interpret objects, because of racism, these objects were misunderstood and were misinterpreted in this country and in Europe. And so, if you'd gone into a museum, you would have seen a label saying, must have been made by Europeans or whatever. And of course that wasn't true. And it took really quite a long time into the 20th century till the research was done to show that, of course, these had been made by Africans in West Africa. And so it's really not only an opportunity to show you something rather beautiful, because you can see, you know, he's drawn the images, but also to show why racism matters, not just in terms of how people treat each other, but the actual other impacts that it can have, particularly impacts on how we understand our history and how we understand the history of objects as well. So that's why we put those in.